There's a moment in every life where everything hangs on a single question. Not the big philosophical ones we overthink in the quiet hours, but something simple, direct, almost mundane. For Evelyn Carter, standing in the dirt with 4 hungry children and nowhere left to turn, that question came from a stranger in a dusty truck on a nameless road in the middle of nowhere. "What can you do?" he asked. Just 4 words. But those 4 words became the foundation of everything that followed. This is the story of a woman who had been turned away by everyone, who carried shame like a second skin, who walked through a town that wouldn't even meet her eyes. And it's the story of how one man's willingness to see past the surface, to ask what mattered instead of what looked right, built something that would last generations. Because sometimes the difference between collapse and salvation isn't luck or timing. It's someone asking the right question at exactly the right moment. The wind that morning carried more than dust. It carried the weight of 1,000 closed doors, 1,000 turned backs, 1,000 polite rejections wrapped in tight smiles. Evelyn walked down that dirt road with her shoulders hunched against more than just the cold. She carried a baby on her hip and dragged 3 more children behind her, their small hands clutching her skirts like lifelines. The suitcase in her hand felt heavier with every step, not because of what it held, but because of what it represented. Everything she owned in the world. Everything left after her husband walked out without a word, just his belt missing from the hook and the truck gone from the drive. She had tried. God knows she had tried. The man at the grain elevator hadn't even let her finish her sentence. The woman at the church wouldn't meet her eyes. For mouths were too many in times like these. The town wasn't cruel, just exhausted. War had taken the young men. Drought had taken the crops. And charity, that fragile thing people cling to when times are good, had dried up completely. She didn't blame them, not really. When survival is the only game left, compassion becomes a luxury nobody can afford. People like Evelyn, thin and desperate, asking for help when they had nothing to offer in return, were walking reminders of just how close everyone else was to the edge. So they looked away. They shook their heads. They turned back to their own problems and hoped she would disappear before guilt had time to settle in their chests. Nearly 3 miles she walked before the road curved away from town and into those wide wheat fields where the wind moved in long silver waves. Her boots crunched into gravel. The baby whimpered. Hunger burned in her belly, sharp and steady, but she didn't show it. She couldn't. She was the wall between her children and the world, and walls don't crumble just because they're tired. She hadn't eaten since the morning before. Her hands trembled. Her vision blurred at the edges. But she kept walking because stopping meant admitting defeat, and she wasn't ready for that yet. Past a ditch where the land rose slightly, and the grass grew wild, Evelyn finally stopped. She set the suitcase down, then the baby, and lowered herself to the ground like her bones had turned to lead. The children gathered close, wordless and pale, their clothes still smelling of coal smoke and metal from the train that had brought them to this godless place. She pulled her knees to her chest and pressed her forehead against them, eyes closed, one thought beating inside her head like a drum. Not now. Not here. Not like this. She thought of the house in Kansas, of the silence her husband left behind, of the whispers about a waitress in Topeka and a card game gone wrong. She didn't care about any of that anymore. What mattered was the quiet he left behind and the weight she carried alone. Then she heard it. The rumble of a diesel truck slowing, stopping. Boots hitting dirt. A man's voice, calm and not unkind, asking if she was all right. She didn't lift her head at first. Didn't trust it. But eventually she raised her eyes and saw him standing there, this big man with wide shoulders and a dust-covered hat pulled low over a face that looked carved more than grown. He said his name was Luke Holstead. Said he had a ranch west of there, and was heading back with supplies. Said if she needed somewhere warm for the night, she could come along. No judgment in his voice. No pity either. Just a simple offer, clean and direct. Evelyn stood slowly, picked up the baby, then the suitcase, and walked toward the truck without answering. The children climbed in first, their small bodies sinking into the warmth, like they'd forgotten what it felt like. She followed. Luke climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key, and they drove a long while without speaking. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens between people who understand that words aren't always necessary, that sometimes the best kindness is just showing up and not asking too many questions. Then, just before the road bent toward the foothills, he asked it. That question. What can you do? It wasn't cruel or suspicious. It wasn't a test. It was curious, as if he genuinely wanted to know what parts of her were still standing, what pieces hadn't been broken yet. Evelyn glanced at him and told the truth. She could cook, clean, and mend what was torn. She could read and count. She worked fast and didn't complain. Then she paused and added something else, something true and raw. She could hold 4 children in her arms and still chop firewood. Luke nodded once, like that made perfect sense, and said that would do. They didn't speak again until the ranch came into view, low buildings set against a sweep of snowy mountains that looked like something out of a dream she'd forgotten long ago. The bunkhouse was small, 2 rooms with cracked windows and an old stove in the corner, but it was dry and it was theirs. Luke handed her a ring of keys, told her where the water pump was, and left without questions. That night, sitting on the edge of the cot with the baby asleep against her chest and the other children curled together beneath a quilt that smelled of cedar and smoke, Evelyn didn't sleep. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her mind wandered through the months behind her, through every humiliation, every closed door, every moment she traded dignity for calories and carried the shame deep in her spine. She had done what she had to. And now she sat in a stranger's bunkhouse with no money and no promises beyond morning chores. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid someone would take her children while she slept. That was something. That was enough for now. She woke before dawn, tied her hair back with a piece of string, and stepped outside where frost clung to the grass like glass. Luke was already in the barn lifting feed sacks like they weighed nothing. She told him to show her where to start. He asked if she knew horses. She said not much, even less about cattle. He said then they'd start with chickens. He showed her how to rake the coop and how to hold the feed bucket so the birds didn't swarm. She watched his hands closely, memorizing every movement. He worked with purpose and without waste, and when she stumbled, he showed her again and stepped back without scolding. They worked most of the day side by side, and the children stayed close, gathering eggs and whispering to goats like they were sharing secrets. When her youngest fell in the mud and cried, Luke handed him a carrot and said there was no shame in getting dirty. The world had worse things. By dusk, Evelyn was worn down to the bone, but it was an honest tired, the kind that comes from work that matters. Luke left a pot of stew on the stoop with bread and a note about fixing a fence the next day. She held that note for a long time before setting it down, reading it over and over like it might disappear. Days fell into rhythm. Work at sunup, rest at noon, supper shared in comfortable quiet. The children followed Luke like he was a steady tree in a world of wind, and he showed them how to calm a horse and carry a feed bucket without spilling. Evelyn watched with a strange ache in her throat, seeing her children laugh again, seeing them safe. One evening, after they closed the barn together, she asked why he stopped for them that first day. He said he saw her boy wave at the truck, a small thing that reminded him of someone he'd lost. That was all. No grand philosophy. No religious duty. Just a wave from a child, and a memory that made him hit the brakes. By spring, the valley had softened. Green crept back into the fields. Calves were born late, and Evelyn helped with 3 of them, calm and steady, her hands sure now where they'd once trembled. The bunkhouse smelled of bread and soap. The children laughed more. Luke brought small gifts, books and carved figures, and she thanked him every time, though it never felt like enough. Still, people in town didn't quite look her in the eye. She heard whispers. Luke heard them too, but he never changed, never wavered, never treated her like anything less than what she was. A woman rebuilding her life one day at a time. Then the letter came. Her husband wanted the children back, claimed she'd abandoned him, twisted the story into something ugly and false. Evelyn folded the letter and tried to hide it, but Luke saw her face and knew. He asked if it was true. She told him the truth, all of it, the parts that hurt and the parts that shamed her. He said she'd need someone on her side. The lawyer laid the facts bare. Without proof, without a legal home, without marriage, it was her word against her husband's. The weight of that word, marriage, settled over them like snow. Evelyn stepped outside, shaking, and Luke followed later. He told her he wasn't asking out of duty or fear. He said he'd stand beside her either way. She took his hand and felt the difference between rescue and choice, between someone saving you because they pity you and someone choosing you because they see your worth. They married quiet and plain, the children standing close. When Evelyn said yes, her voice didn't shake. The hearing came in June. Her husband sat smug and distant. Luke spoke steady about the life Evelyn had built. Evelyn told the truth in clear words. When it ended, the judge said she'd consider. They drove home under a wide sky and waited. Weeks later, the letter came. Custody denied, guardianship granted to Evelyn Holstead. She read her new name 3 times before it felt real. Life didn't suddenly transform, but it eased. Luke built shelves for her books and carved her name into the wood. The children called him Pa without being told. Evelyn lifted her face to the sun and let herself belong to this place, to this life, to this second chance she'd stopped believing existed. By fall, the orchard bore a few apples. She boiled them down and made pie, and Luke said it smelled like something worth staying alive for. Winter came hard, but the house was ready. One morning, she felt a flutter low in her belly. Weeks later, she told Luke, and he held her like he understood the weight of new hope, the terrifying beauty of building something that might actually last. Spring returned. The baby came in August, a girl they named Clara. She didn't cry right away, just blinked up at Evelyn, calm and wide-eyed, like she already knew she was safe. Luke held her like a miracle he'd never thought to ask for. Years passed, steady and full. The orchard grew fuller. The children grew strong and kind. Evelyn found her old suitcase in the loft one day and closed it for good. She didn't need it anymore. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was home. One evening, Luke asked if she ever thought of leaving. She told him no, because she finally knew what it felt like to stay, to put down roots, to build something that wouldn't blow away with the next strong wind. She leaned into him and watched the light fade over the valley, a home standing solid behind them, a life built slow and honest, brick by brick, day by day. And she smiled, knowing this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything that mattered.